end of the fourth generation truck in 91 was the 25th anniversary of the Bronco. And so they did come out with a 25th anniversary edition.
Totally something that I would expect to see on an episode of Knight Rider. You know, like David Hasselhoff gets out of kit and gets into his Knight Bronco. Like, all right, welcome back. Another episode. Todd, it's awesome to have you on this episode. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. It's great to be with you. It's a real honor to be on your podcast.
And if you guys aren't familiar with who Todd is, we've been talking about the book a lot, A History of Ford's Legendary 4x4 Ford Bronco, and Todd is the author of this book. So very cool to have you on. We've definitely used your book a lot and used it as a lot of our information on this podcast. So really appreciate all the work that you did on that.
Well, thanks, guys. I'm happy you're using it, and I hope folks may have been able to pick up a copy since they heard about it on your show. It was a great labor of love for me to do it, and just real happy to spread the word with it.
Now, Todd actually gave me a signed copy. Donnie, is your copy signed?
No.
And he wrote to John, the king of Bronco media. He called me the king of Bronco media. I don't know if you're the king of Bronco media, but I am. Thanks for all you do for the little corner of our world. Hope you enjoy the book. Your friend, Todd Zuercher. He's my friend.
I know. So, Todd, I actually bought John another copy at Christmas, and on our Christmas episode, I was going to give it to him.
I lost.
But then your signed copy came in, and I didn't know what to do with mine. But you had written a love letter to John in the copy I was going to give him. Like how much I love you, and it was really funny. But then John shows up and goes, "Look what I got."
Yep. Well,
I try to put personalized messages into people that buy those from me, and if you buy a copy from Jeff Bezos, you're not going to get that.
That's right.
So
that's right. Well, Todd, part of our podcast, we like to just kind of catch up and see what we've been working on in the shop, see what we've been doing with our Broncos, or just even in life. So what have you been working on here recently for all of our viewers?
Well, I'm at a point with my Bronco. So I own an early Bronco, and I'm at a point right now where I've done most of the upgrades on it. So most of my stuff is maintenance type things. And so there's always, as any Bronco owner knows, there's always some little maintenance thing that you need to do. And so most of the stuff I've done with the Bronco lately has just been a lot of maintenance items, which isn't real exciting to talk about. I'm just been out driving my truck more in the past few months. Outside of the truck, like you work on the podcast and videos and so on, I'm often working on words.
Yeah.
So I just finished an article for Bronco Driver magazine about the Broncos that were at the SEMA show last fall.
Nice.
So that will be coming out in the next issue. And I wrote another chapter in a book for a friend of mine about a Bronco, and working on some historical stuff. My good friend Andrew Norton and I are always rescuing old strop racing Broncos, and so he and I own another truck together now, and so been working on some of that. The Bronco's actually at Andrew's shop in California, so I can't be there with a lot of hands-on stuff, but there's always historical research and photos, and I really geek out on that kind of stuff. So we've been working on that.
Wow.
And it's just, there's always a couple of, historical project type things that I'm thinking about. The wheels are always churning. What can we write about? What mysteries haven't we solved yet? So that's kind of what I've been working on the last 6 or 8 months.
And you guys are in Arizona, right? Is that where you're at?
I'm in Arizona. I live in Phoenix.
Yeah.
Andrew lives up in Northern California, north of San Francisco.
Okay. And you're a big part of the Arizona club, Bronco club there, right?
I have a lot of history with it. To be honest, I have not been very active with the Arizona Classic Bronco Club in the last 5 or 6 years, but I do have a long history with it. I joined it right out of college, which I'm showing my age was about, well, it was now over 30 years ago. And I did a lot of writing for newsletters, led runs. I was president for, I think, about 3 terms.
Wow.
So yeah, very involved with the Arizona Club. Long time Arizona guy. So yeah, I know a lot of the people in the Arizona area, and it's a hotbed for Broncos. There have always been a lot of Broncos in Arizona. So
yeah.
We've been blessed that way.
That's cool. Yeah. That's cool. Donnie, what have you been working on?
It's funny that you talked about the Strop Racing Bronco, because I was reading the inside back cover, the flap of Todd's book, and I saw that he had co-owned 1 or 2 of the Strop Racing Broncos from the Baja days, late 60s, early 70s. And I started looking online and trying to buy die-cast big Ollies and Strop Broncos and stuff.
Yeah.
And I got this one in the mail the other day. So
nice.
It's funny. I went to Tom's website and they have like 43 die-cast models for sale. And I think they even have some of the Strop Racers too. I have to go back and look again. But yeah, I've been goofing around on the internet buying stuff.
That's a whole nother realm too. When you get into collecting those die casts, I mean, there are people that have like 2 or 3 rooms in their house dedicated to these things.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. I have a few. Like I just have a few, but yeah, it's a whole collector thing. Well, moving along, we're going to do the parts corner today on this episode, because as a Bronco enthusiast, as a Bronco person who works on Broncos, you're always looking for new parts, new tools, new whatever it is that you can use on your Bronco. So I've got a part, Donnie has some parts, Todd has some parts that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to go first because it's actually something that I don't have yet. So as you guys know, I do video production, and one of my clients is Ian Johnson. So we were over at his shop, working on, this Cummins repowered Jeep, and he pulls out this, Harbor Freight floor jack. It was the Badlands Harbor Freight floor jack. And this thing was awesome. Like, it's the perfect, he said it was I don't know the brand, like a copy of a War Eagle floor jack or something like that. But I mean, it sits super high. It has these big, like off-road hard plastic wheels on it. But it worked. Like most floor jacks you get are low profile. They don't jack up very high. This thing, I mean, it was like, we could really jack what we were working on up. And so I was like, okay, I'm putting this on my list of things to buy. It's a little expensive. I think it was like $300, but still, Harbor Freight, and it's actually good quality. Usually Harbor Freight stuff, I'm like, that might not last very long, but this felt like it was good quality. Donnie, what you got on your list?
Well, I've been doing all these EFI conversions on Broncos, and so we're dropping all the fuel tanks, and you got to convert them, put a high pressure fuel pump in them and things like that. And I actually got this new auxiliary tank that came with the straps, a skid plate, but it's an auxiliary tank, but it doesn't have the issue that all the other ones have. So the opening the filler neck, essentially, it doesn't get smaller as it goes towards the tank, so it doesn't spit fuel back at you. And Tom's redesigned a tank that has a large diameter opening, so you can fill it as fast as you can your regular tank.
Wow.
But it comes all set up for EFI too. So yeah, it's pretty neat. It's going to save me a lot of time.
So this is an auxiliary tank?
Yeah.
And for EFI as well?
Yeah. A lot of times so you can run separate pumps. Yeah, because you got to have high pressure either way.
Yeah.
So whether you're on auxiliary or the main tank. Yeah. So, but this tank, the nice thing is all the fittings and everything on it, you can just slide the parts in. It's so much easier.
That's cool. Man, that's very cool. All right, Todd, you got any parts for our Bronco enthusiasts?
I don't have parts per se, but I do want to say a shout out for a tool. You talked about the new Harbor Freight jacket.
Yeah.
One tool I've discovered in the past year is a cordless ratchet, and I'm a Milwaukee man, so mine happens to be Milwaukee, but I know they're made by a variety of manufacturers. And I put this off for a long time because I had an Air cordless ratchet years ago, and it was kind of a pain. You always had that umbilical cord hanging off of it and dragging it around, and I'm like, let's just use a socket.
Yep.
And at some point in the last year, I bought one of these cordless ratchets, and it's awesome. Mine's a 12-volt 3/8 drive, and so the head's a little smaller. We've all gone to the cordless impacts and stuff, and they're handy, and they have a great place where they're used too. But the impact, the head's a little, or the ratchet, the head's a little smaller. You can get it into tight places. I was working on changing a starter out a few months ago, and man, you can just get that up in there and put your extension on it, and it's the perfect. I'm amazed how many times I find myself grabbing that now. If it's intake manifold bolts, or you're doing the timing cover, the water pump, or there's just a million different places to use it, and so that's something that I've put in my toolbox in the recent past, and gets used a lot now. I really like it.
Yeah, that's cool. I recently did the Milwaukee Impact driver, and man, that thing is just a beast. It'll break any bolt on my Bronco. It's like all these old rusty bolts, and it'll snap it off. But it actually works really, really well. I've really enjoyed having that thing.
Both of those jobs, whether you're taking heavy bolts off, you bust your knuckles, or you're getting in tight spots around the exhaust manifolds, or the intake, you end up just slicing your knuckles all up. So if you can have a power tool, way better.
Yep. Cordless ratchet. I'm going to have to put that on my list too. I just pulled it up. It looks pretty cool. Nice. Well, moving right along through our episode today. So obviously we've got Todd on, and we're going to talk about some 4th and 5th generation Bronco history here. And just kind of go through some of the highlights. Now, we already talked about 2nd gen. We talked about 3rd generation in the last episode, and so moving into 4th and 5th generation, we just felt like that this was going to be a good one to just kind of hear from Todd on, to hear from him just kind of what some of the upgrades were, and those kinds of things, what some of the changes were. So Todd, talk us through. So we're coming out of the 3rd generation in, what was it, 86, going into 87.
86, right, 86 to 87.
What were, they kind of took it to a sleeker design on the 4th generation, but what were some of the big changes, big upgrades that the 4th generation had?
Well, you really touched on it there with the body changes. The 3rd generation trucks, although they were more aerodynamic than the 2nd generation trucks, they were still fairly blocky and squared off looking, if you will. And then for 87, I think it was really built, there were so many aero cues, if you would call them, coming out of Ford in the mid 80s with the Taurus in 86 and the Thunderbird that came out, I think it was in 83, all this rounded sculpture type stuff to be more aerodynamic. And that's what they really did with the 87 Bronco. They went to the flush mounted headlights for the first time, and the sides had a little more curvature to them. The hood was a little more smoother. Yeah. So the aero was a big deal in appearance wise. In terms of powertrains, the 3rd generation probably had the greatest evolution to it from 1980 to 86. So by the time you get to 86, they had put EFI on the 302, the 5-liter, which was a huge game changer, and added the AOD transmission for automatic overdrive. And then they just continued that with 87 on in that generation. So during the 4th generation, they added EFI to the 306 cylinder, and they added EFI to the 351. So that made a huge difference in terms of the drivability and reliability of the trucks.
Yeah.
The other thing they did was they did the AOD, which was the lighter duty automatic overdrive transmission that you could get behind the 5-liter. They also went to 5-speed manual overdrive transmission. So
interesting.
So you now could have a 5-speed that had a little slower first gear, a little lower first gear, and then you drive it down the freeway, shift into 5th gear. You're not screaming along at 3,000 RPM anymore. It's more comfortable ride. The engine's not screaming at you. They actually started out with 2 different transmissions very early in '87. There was one that had it was called the ZF, and it had a granny low, and for some reason they didn't use that very long. They ditched that and they went back to the 4-speed. So if you still wanted a granny low first gear in the 4th and 5th generation trucks, you still had I think it was either the T18 or the New Process 435. I think they kind of used them interchangeably there, but they just became more refined. They added rear wheel ABS,
which was the first SUV to have ABS, right?
I believe that's true. Yes. Yeah. Now, people today, of course, would say, "Well, that's kind of crude and so on." But you know what? We've all got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And that was a good start. Interior wise, the 4th generation were a little more smoothed out. Again, the 3rd gen still had the very squared off instrument panel and sharp edges and so on. And then you move into '87 and everything just flows a little more nicely and it's a little more updated. I will say that I think adding fuel injection to those engines there at the beginning of the 4th gen and then carrying on to the 5th gen has really made those trucks a lot more desirable and reliable too for people that are collecting those trucks today. I think that's one reason that you don't see as many 3rd gens on the road anymore, is because the majority of those were carbureted, and people, by the 4th or 5th owner, people were just sick of dealing with those carburetors, and anyone that's lived through the malaise era cars know that they were just a pain. And so suddenly we have fuel injection, and oh gosh, the thing starts every morning. And it doesn't matter whether it's cold, and the engines last longer because the cylinders aren't getting washed down by fuel, and so on. So you see more of those later trucks on the road. And then I should mention the end of the 4th generation trucks in '91 was the 25th anniversary of the Bronco, and so they did come out with a 25th anniversary edition. It came out, it was only one color. It was currant red, and it had some leather seating surfaces in it. I think that was the first Bronco that ever had leather in it. You got a special key for the ignition, and you got a special, I call it a members only jacket, sort of in jest, but it was a 20, that style, kind of a 25th, as you would get in 1991. And, you see more of those. They had a badge on the beat pillar, and so you see those haven't taken off a lot in terms of value, but you see them for sale. There's been some of those listed for sale on Bring a Trailer and that kind of thing. And then they also added the E4OD, which was like the C6 version with overdrive in 1990 or 91, and so that was then behind the 351. So again, lots of refinement in the 4th gen, which still makes them a very decent driver today. And then you move into the 5th gen.
Well, before you do that, was Eddie Bauer, was that 4th generation, that first Eddie Bauer?
That actually started in the 3rd gen. That started in '83 or '84. I can't remember which year. I'm sorry, I don't have my book in front of me. It was either '83. In fact, I think I left that out. That's one omission in the book. I didn't mention what year that started. The Bronco. I think it was '83. Yeah. So it was still in the 3rd gen. And I'll just say, just a note on the Eddie Bauer thing. That was kind of an interesting pairing. I remember when it came out in the '80s, and it was. I'm like, what is this? But Eddie Bauer, people should remember that Eddie Bauer was like the West Coast version of LL Bean. It wasn't just a clothing store in the mall like it might be today. I'm not even sure. I guess they're still around, but it was just a lifestyle thing. And they really did a nice job with those trucks, whether it's a 4th gen or a 5th gen. The interiors, the colors, just really, really well done.
Yeah,
really well done.
Well, and then also the 4th gen, I think, is the one that had the night Broncos too, right?
Yes, the 1991. There were just thank you for mentioning that. There were very few of those, and some people will say that there weren't any in 91, but I think it's because there were so few. Kevin Marty, in his reports, say I think there was like between 350 and 400 of them. Wow. There weren't that many. Yeah, wow. They were more common in the 92 Broncos and F-150s. So again, that was kind of that's what you would expect from that time period in the early 90s. Things blacked out and monochromatic. And frankly, I think those particular vehicles have aged pretty well.
Yeah.
I guess we're all biased. But,
it's totally something that I would expect to see on an episode of Knight Rider. David Hasselhoff gets out of kit and gets into his Knight Bronco. That's how I picture it.
Yeah, and you probably had Rancho shocks with pink shock boots on it or something like that.
Exactly. Yep.
Which generation was the when the Centurion came out, like the suburban version of the Bronco?
That actually started during the 4th generation, and then carried into the 5th. I'd have to go back and look. I didn't cover Centurions in the book just because I didn't have enough space, but I believe they started probably 87 or 88, something like that. Yeah. Those are a whole nother breed that probably deserve a chapter unto themselves. They're interesting vehicles.
So moving into 5th generation, then, I don't feel like, were there a lot of big changes between the 4th and 5th generation Bronco?
There really weren't. Again, it was just a little bit of refinement here and there. I'm biased. I think the 5th generation is the best looking of the bigger trucks. They added in 94. They added an airbag for the driver's steering wheel, and they moved in that generation. They moved to 4-wheel ABS.
Okay,
and they started with leather upholstery became more widely available, and like if you were sitting in the back seat of a 5th gen, you finally got a 3-point belt instead of just a lap belt. Yeah. So, some things like that. And on the engines wise, not much changed, although I will say just from a techie standpoint, in 94, the 351's got a roller cam, which those roller cam 351s have become very popular engines to retrofit into other Broncos and things like that. There's just a little bit of cachet with those. So powertrain wise, not a lot of changes, but I will say, the 5th gen again has, I think, the best color schemes of any of the Broncos. And I think they're probably second only. Well, maybe it's a horse race between the 2nd gen and the 5th gen, but the 5th gen really has come into its own in terms of collectability in the last few years for really nice examples. I mean, you look at the color schemes on the last 3 or 4 years of those trucks, and it's total 90s, but they've aged well and just beautiful color schemes. Not just the Eddie Bauers. I mean, they're just some of the solid color schemes too. They're just beautiful, beautiful trucks.
Yeah. I agree. I am a 3rd gen. I love the 3rd gen. I love the combo of the smaller and the 2nd gen grill and all of that. But I do. Mm-hmm. The 5th has grown on me, and there's so much you can do with it. And even like you have in your book some of the more Raptor style desert racing 5th gens, and I just think those are really cool, and those have aged really well.
Yeah, there's a lot of modifications, like you say, on those trucks. There's a certain contingent that really hate the twin traction beam and think it's just terrible, and they rip it out and they put a solid axle in. That's fine, mud bogs, rock crawling, whatever.
Yeah.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, as I have in the book there's a whole subculture of these desert pre-runners where you can just spend an inordinate amount of money, beefing up and rebuilding that. And the twin traction beam has a very, very long and storied history in desert racing because it was so bulletproof and you could build long travel, relatively speaking, very cheaply. And so Broncos have become very popular that way with race teams because you can have a lot of lockable storage inside, and you can still have a truck that you can haul 3 or 4 people around, and you can move reasonably quick, down a desert course if you're pre-running or bebopping around in Baja somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
On those color schemes, I really like the color match roofs they did on the Gen 5s, like the red on red. I just thought that looked amazing.
Yeah. There's the red ones were really striking. And then there's some I call it a light green that was really, really pretty too. So yeah, I sometimes I just pull out the 94, 95, 96 brochures and just go to the back page where they have all the different color combinations on it and just look at it. And it's just,
were there stripe kits in that Gen?
Not really. The stripe kits kind of went away in the 80s. There were the freewheeling stuff, and then in the third gen in 82 and 83 there was the XLS edition, which is really rare, and those were about the last of the stripe kits. I mean, I say stripe kits. There are still pinstripes and things like that, but they're not. There were no freewheeler type trucks in the fourth and fifth generation trucks. Yeah.
And then there's the trucks they built that they were trying to, obviously sell a bunch of, the Broncos edition with John Elway.
Yeah, now those are very rare. If I recall, I think there were only about 7 or 8 of those built. I saw one of those for sale recently, and I can't even remember what venue I saw it at, but I think I somehow got a hold of the owner and I said, those are pretty rare vehicles. There is a picture in the book that I got from the guy that built those, with John Elway standing with a number of those trucks lined up in a field. And I think he told me that was about all of those that we built. So
I think ironically he was number 7 and they built 7.
Yeah, that might be. Yeah. I think it was 10 or less. So yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to think back. Okay. They did the Denver Broncos Bronco back in the 70s and 1975. And, there's some uncertainty, we'll say, on how many of those exactly were built, but there were a lot more of those built in the 70s than there were with the John Elway edition in 1989.
And those early Denver Broncos on the first gen, those were red, white, and blue, and they looked a lot like a strop, didn't they?
They did. They had the exact same color scheme with the exception of they had a white hood, and the Baja Broncos had a black hood.
Oh yeah.
And most of the Denver Broncos actually started out as uncut trucks, and then ended up getting cut. I don't know the numbers of, how many of each type were done, but there are quite a. If you're in Colorado, for example, at Supercell West, there's usually a couple of uncut Denver Broncos that show up at that event.
Wow.
So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, man, so appreciate it, Todd. Thank you. Thank you for your time. And for everyone who's listening, if you haven't yet picked up a copy of Todd's book, History of Ford's Legendary 4x4 Ford Bronco, definitely worth the read. And definitely not or it is a coffee table book. This is one that I enjoy just kind of leaving out, and letting guests thumb through it when they come over. So it looks good. You did a great job with it, Todd, and we appreciate having you on.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun. It's always great to talk Bronco with friends.
Yeah.
My wife is familiar with your book. We have an entire library, and she's like, "Why are you always reading the same book?" There's hundreds here.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you for Todd for being on, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.